Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI, Government in the Future. I'm your host, Marc Leh, and today I'm excited to welcome Manish Parashar to the show. Manish is a renowned leader in computational science and engineering with an extraordinary career spanning groundbreaking contributions to high-performance computing and AI. Currently serving as the Director of Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute at the University of Utah, Manish has also held pivotal roles, including as Office Director at the National Science Foundation's Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. His work has shaped national and global discussions on advanced computing, including co-chairing the National Artificial Intelligence Research Resource Task Force. Today, we'll dive into various concepts related to identifying key innovations related to AI, gaps that government and the private sector may be well positioned to address, and maybe some concepts around democratizing or making more actionable, responsible AI capabilities. Overall, we'll be looking to see how we can unlock AI's potential for societal good while maintaining, competitive advantages here in the United States and for industry stakeholders globally. So welcome to the show, Manish. It's great to have you.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be on the show.
Likewise. So, Manish, let's start today's discussion by giving our listeners some insight into your professional journey. I guess, could you describe what initially drew you to work at the intersection of technology, governance, public impact, and research? And how has this path shaped your current focus and your current role?
Sure, Mark. My background and formal training is in computer engineering and computer science. And while I do enjoy research, more foundational research in these areas, increasingly I realized what excited me the most was the way this research impacts science and society. How does it enable scientists to think about new ways to address important challenges? How they use the technology to advance and benefit society, right? And so that got me more interested in the translational aspects and the intersection of how do I take research and enable it into technologies that can be broadly used, and what are the governance structures and policy structures that can make sure that you can have that impact. And that sort of led me to explore different ways that I could bring these pieces together to really have the transformative impact that computing, computational science, computer science can have on science and society broadly.
Great. Thanks for that context. And I guess, Manish, do you mind describing kind of your current role and what you're focused on these days?
Absolutely. So I'm currently at the University of Utah. I direct the Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute here. This is a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary institute that really brings together core computer science research in scientific computing, imaging, visualization, data analytics, and applies it to a range of different science areas, application areas, right? So we have faculty that work together to really take computer science and through translation to development of software and tools impacting these science areas. Right? In addition to that, I'm a faculty in the Calhert School of Computing here, and I'm also leading an initiative that's a university-wide, statewide initiative called the Responsible AI Initiative. And the goal there is, again, how do we harness AI in a responsible way to address some of the most important challenges for the state and the region, such as sustainability, water sustainability, air quality, health and wellness, for example, mental health, and workforce development.
Great. Well, I think we can dive into both the technical opportunities and challenges, governance, and maybe some best practices for responsible AI rollout here during today's conversation. Looking more at the underlying technology, given that you have extensive experience in computer science and high performance computing, what do you see as kind of the most impactful recent innovations related to AI and advanced computing, and to use your words, how those technologies are being translated into high impact public applications?
While AI has been around for some time, right, what has really transformed it into this really highly impactful technology is through the availability of large scale computing and large amounts of data, right? We've had over the past decade or so, we've been able to create tremendous amount of data, but we also built very large data centers and computing platforms that can process that data in a meaningful time frame, right? And so that's really allowed AI to really become this transformative technology that's so pervasive right now, impacting all aspects of science, society, right? So the technology keeps on improving, finding new ways, new types of processing technologies that are more focused, that can more effectively both train models, enable inferencing in diverse areas, not just in these large cloud platforms, but also at the edge within the devices that we have between our automobiles, right? So it just provides you this opportunity as these technologies evolve and new processing capabilities and new software stacks come into play, that we can really have a broader impact using AI. Now, the AI itself is evolving both in terms of its capability. We're seeing subsequent generations of large language models coming out that are more powerful, that are more accurate, that hallucinate less. But we're also seeing other types of models that are more focused, that are smaller, that are more targeted, that can enable specific applications. So we're definitely going to see that the core AI methods will evolve, but they will also evolve in the way they address some of the concerns we have seen around initial models that came out, right? So that's going to evolve. Issues around responsible AI, around trust and fairness and explainability and privacy preservation, all those things will evolve as research goes forward. And maybe finally we'll see that the applications will evolve, right? Right now, we're still trying to figure out how do we bring this into these applications, right? AI is definitely a transformative technology. It's different, in my mind, from many of the innovations we've seen over the past few decades in technology, right? Not because it's so powerful, but because it does things that other technologies cannot. It can make decisions. It can act on behalf of humans, right? And so that makes it a lot more powerful. And so we're trying, I think the applications are going to evolve on how we effectively use this technology as we move forward. So it's going to be exciting. I think you're going to see a lot of advances along all these dimensions. And if you do it right, it can really transform science and society.
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of application domains that are, emerging, are there any areas or use cases that you're particularly excited about that haven't maybe received the attention or widespread adoption yet?
I think the promise is very broad from a science perspective, because that's an area that I'm very excited about. I think there's this potential in how AI and data-driven approaches can complement more traditional mathematical approaches to really move us significantly forward in the way we understand natural phenomena, right? How do you understand different scientific problems, and then how do we build solutions? For example, in using this in drug design and material design, right? So a lot of the things that can have tremendous impact, scientific challenges, right? I think AI can be a tremendous complement to the tool sets that we have right now. So I think that's an area that I'm very excited about. And the other thing that I'm excited about is how it can advance learning and teaching, right? I think this is, how do we do this in a scalable way so that we can provide opportunities to everybody, right? And I think AI can be a tool where we can scale things out and customize things so that we can make sure that everybody has the same level and types of opportunities to advance and benefit, right? So I think these are areas, right, in addition to the many other areas, these are places where I'm most excited about.
Yeah, well, Manish, you spoke to at least a few priorities that here at Corner Alliance that we've leveraged AI tools initially for content onboarding and bringing kind of new entrants to the workforce up to speed on more technical disciplines and new techniques. So I echo your enthusiasm around the educational promise of democratizing complex comment concepts and distilling them into accessible learning resources for folks. And then on the characterizing natural phenomena, I know that a lot of leading R&D laboratories across government are looking at leveraging AI powered digital twin technologies to simulate very complex processes, whether it's across the supply chain, specific manufacturing processes, public grid utility uses and patterns, things like that. So I think there's a lot of real potential there for models to become more precise, more reliable, more trustworthy, and I guess more integrated into classical workflows, for lack of a better term. We talked about some of the key technical innovations taking place. Manish, from your perspective, what do you see as either the key technology research or even governance gaps that still need to be addressed in order to realize this, optimism or potential around new AI applications?
I think in many ways we are in early days on trying to be able to really build these focused models and the frameworks around them to really impact these applications, right? In a sense, we're doing these large language models, which in one way could be characterized as a brute force approach, right? We're throwing everything we know into these models and they're useful, right? But as we learn and understand them better, we'll start building more focused models that are targeted in the information they use and the decisions that make. And that allows us also to define guardrails around them in terms of being able to, whether it's policy guardrails or technical guardrails, which allows us to be a little more, have more trust in the type of decisions they make, right? And the ability to detect when things are not working as we expect and then take actions around it. Right, so I think that's really natural evolution and remains, an area of active research. Right, same thing in terms of the technology. Right now we depend on very, very large data centers to be able to run these models, and that has two problems. One is just the impact of having these big data centers. You can't have too many of them, but it also creates a divide between who can access and contribute to the AI R&D ecosystem and who cannot, right? And I think that's another place. One is to find innovative ways to provide resources to individuals, but the other one is to build models that are more accessible to researchers and educators and students, so they can all be part of this revolution and be able to contribute and benefit from it, right? So these are some of the gaps you're looking at. Clearly there are more, right? There's around policy frameworks. We are still discovering what the right regulation and what the right balance is between consumer protection or privacy and innovation, right? And how do we do that? So many states are looking at what these right trade-offs are. There are countries looking at different ways of doing it. So there are many, many challenges, as I said, this early days, but I think these are a few, I think, that are particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's well said. And one thing I would like to key in on is that idea around providing more efficient computing resources or educational resources to students, researchers, maybe early stage companies that either lower the barriers or to make more accessible, interaction with the AI computing ecosystem, as you said. You've worked at, federal programs before at National Science Foundation. Do you see government playing a role in supporting access to kind of the benefits of AI, while supporting kind of the competitive edge that US currently enjoys?
Right. Absolutely, right. So let me start by really re-emphasizing what you said, right? While it's always important to increase the diversity of thought and opinion in research, right, bringing new perspectives, it's particularly important in AI because the way the technology evolves depends on who's developing it, who's using it, who has access to it, right? And so it evolves based on that, depends on the data sets that are being fed into it, right? So in that sense, having this diversity of users and developers is so critical, right? And the other point I'd like to sort of again emphasize is that the critical role that that computing and data has in AI currently, right? And so as we want to broaden or democratize AI, we want to make sure that more people have access to the base tools, technologies, the infrastructure that's needed so that they can have access to it. And that really is, in terms of the federal government, that is sort of the goal of the National AI Research Resource, right? That came out as part of the AI Initiative Act of 2020 and the It was really recognition that this is a transformative technology. And currently, at that time, access to it was limited to the very large enterprises and institutions that had huge resources, right? And that produced a big gap, right? So the National AI Resource Task Force was charged to come up with a roadmap on how would we build a national resource that can broaden access to this infrastructure for AI R&D, for education, for training, for research, right? And so task force met over 18 months and came up with a recommendation of what this resource could be, which is really a federation of public and private resources coming together along with the support services and the software tools so it can be broadly accessible, right? So the message here is that with the right model such as the NAIR and right partnership model such as the NAIR, along with the right framework for making it accessible and building an ability to access it, I think the federal government can really have a huge impact on how this technology evolves and really in leveling the playing field so that we can actually ensure leadership in AI.
Well, that's great. Well, also you mentioned frameworks. Are there any best practices from a governance or, policy or framework development perspective that you have seen proven to be successful in promoting, responsible AI?
Right now, I think it's still early days. There are large number of activities going on. There are many states, I think 40 states, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't have the exact number, are looking at ways to really balance this innovation with the regulation and building frameworks for responsible AI at the state level. At the highest level, there's a federal executive order that came out in 23 that created a broader framework in terms of what the best practices are and how to, what does responsible AI mean, and more of a guidelines, right? So I think it's early days. I mean, I can talk a little bit about what's happening here in Utah, right? They had a legislation that was passed in April of last year, which did a few different things. One thing it did was to try to balance consumer protection, disclosure with innovation. And they set up an Office of AI policy that can then manage that. And a key innovation there was this idea of learning labs, where working with this Office of AI policy, small companies, entrepreneurs could work within this sandbox to be able to innovate, right? And so that they have more freedom to innovate, right? But it's in a controlled environment. And I think that's been very effective. It's still early days, as I mentioned, but that has been effective. And then internationally, right, we have things coming out of, for example, EU, which is a little more regulatory. They try to categorize the risk of AI and then have different levels of management or regulation depending on where they are. The other end, there is the UK, which is, again, a little more focused on healthcare, but is not very dissimilar from what the US is doing. So I think it's still early days. We're still trying to figure out what works and how to coordinate these efforts. But I think it's going to be an exciting next couple of years as these things pan out.
I would agree. And I think one approach that we've seen some of the research organizations that we work with focus on has been, developing consistent, proven, credible ways to evaluate the performance, and performance maybe in air quotes there, of AI models, and whether or not the models are producing reliable and accurate or precise results. And trying to maybe develop some sort of output metrics or KPIs that can classify not necessarily, the risk level of the application, which might be a little bit more the EU AI Act way of doing things, but kind of scoring the results or the repeatability of a model output in and of itself. I don't know if there are any kind of specific examples, Manish, that you've seen effective, whether it's through some of those learning labs or, Utah specific activities related to the ways in which one might evaluate kind of the responsibility of an AI capability, but any thoughts there?
This is something we're working on, and I don't think we have results at this point, but we have an approach both from a technical perspective, which is relatively easier, right? The things you can measure from the type of incorrect answers, number of hallucinations, right? Things that we can quantify. But there are also the subjective aspects, right? What is the perception of the outputs that are coming out from these models, right? And how does it impact? How are they used? How does it affect the trust of the user in terms of helping them make decisions, right? And we're trying to measure. There are a lot of researchers at the U who are working on different aspects in the context of medical diagnosis, for example, or material design. So different areas, right? We have researchers that are trying to figure out. We're also thinking about creating a rubric that, as researchers start using these technologies, what is the framework within which they want to be able to work in, right? For example, how do we make sure they're aware that this is, while it's a very powerful technology, there are concerns, and how do they build that into their research plan, right? So while it is more advisory than regulatory here at the university, we are talking about how do we make sure, as faculty come in and start doing projects with AI, that they have a framework in which they can reason about these different trade-offs.
Yeah. And I think two things. One, what you're talking about in terms of creating a rubric and the subjective nature or subjective metrics for evaluating how an AI output or model can affect the trust or the decisions or operations of a user. I mean, that requires a tremendous diversity of different disciplines to weigh in on what needs to be considered as part of that rubric. Social science or behavioral science to a degree. But I mean, if you're using it in a medical application, that domain expertise, all paired with computing and engineering capabilities as well. It's highly complex. So I think it's good to take a posture of, here are things to consider and provide advisory services rather than maybe prescribing a really rigid requirement or framework at this point, given that there's still a lot of work to be done.
You're absolutely right. I mean, one approach, again, at the U, as part of our responsible AI initiative, is that we really want to make sure it's truly multidisciplinary. So we have the technologists there, we have the science folk, but we also have individuals and researchers from humanities, right? From social work, from the law school, right? Policy folks, right? We're trying to really look at it holistically in these application areas so we can look at how do we bring all these expertise together. But the other part of it is we're also trying to see how we can expose students to these different aspects, right? Because when they go into the workforce, they definitely have to deal with the technology, but they are often faced with these ethical questions when they're building solutions that they have to be equipped to address. And so we're trying to make sure students have that as well.
I think that's important. And one, we've talked a little bit about how AI is transforming, today's workforce and maybe any sort of upskilling or skills development activities that are necessary for, those entering the workforce from school, what is needed to be able to leverage and interact with and apply scrutiny to some of these tools. So I guess, Manish, from your perspective, are there any disciplines or, skills areas that you feel are particularly important or would enable success working, with these tools in a professional way?
So I think there are a few different things here, right? One is, okay, how do we incorporate that as another tool that they can use as part of their learning process, right? It's not just learning AI, but also using it when they're doing physics and chemistry and other areas, right? But understanding what the limitations are, that they're responsible when it hallucinates, they cannot blame it on the AI, right? Understanding what are the ethical issues, the IP issues involved here. Understanding the fact that there are concerns in the, from a privacy perspective that they have to be, right? So giving them an idea that this is a tool that's going to be critical to their future when they go into the workforce, but also understanding, what the limitations are. The other thing we are doing related to that, and we've just started doing this, is to work on training the K-12 teachers. Right now, they are already thinking about how they should incorporate AI, right? But many of our school teachers are not equipped to be able to address some of these things, right? So we're trying to see how we can the teacher training program, how can we incorporate some of these concepts in there? And again, the idea is not just talk about the technology and how you use the technology, but also talk about more holistically about what are the other socio-technical issues associated with the technology and how do you understand that, right? And so we're trying to work on all these things. We also have an upskilling program where we can have individuals in the workforce coming back and learning about how they can incorporate that, right? So I think there are a bunch of different approaches we are looking. And finally, I think maybe the other thing that AI can really benefit is from a teaching perspective, right? Teachers need to know how to use this tool in the most effective way, because it can be very powerful in the way they deliver their lessons, but also how they scale it up and provide more than just the lecture to the students. And so we're trying to build that in both in terms of technology, but also research in how do we incorporate that into the teaching process itself.
Yeah, and one common theme in terms of identifying opportunities to, I think we're talking about increasing access and the effectiveness of individuals leveraging AI. From personal experience, I'll go into ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini and start building, entering in my own prompts and refining to see kind of and iterating on outputs to see how we can improve. So I think if, academic institutions, either even federal or public sector programs, could start presenting, almost modules of this is an AI application for, scaling a lesson plan or delivering, instruction in a remote learning environment, and just developing really easy to access and repeat, best practices or frameworks or, mini tools essentially for conducting specific functions that might energize or expedite the learning curve for someone who hasn't worked with AI tools to start integrating those capabilities into their, classical workflow. I guess, have you seen any effective, rollout of tools or learning resources that are kind of packaged within some of the leading LLMs recently?
Absolutely, right. So I think one is just in terms of making information more accessible to teachers and educators. That's one. But more interestingly, we have a group here at the university looking at how can we leverage LLMs to create virtual teaching assistants that are more customized for students, right? And I think they're working on building framework around that, and then working with students to see how effective they can be, right? Can that be a way of being able to provide a more personalized experience for each student, right, based on their learning level or their constraints, right? And at the same time, having the teacher be able to then manage how these large classes operate, right? And seeing how effective that can be, right? So that's another one. And there are other such pilots we are working on to figure out how we can bring those tools and those technologies into the classroom.
Well, I think in terms of best practices, guiding principles for, government use or public use of AIs, do you have any recommendations for how organizations, public sector, private industry, might leverage AI tools more effectively, or any sort of specific character or considerations related to how they might leverage AI tools responsibly?
I think there's three dimensions to responsible use of AI, right? The first one is the technology itself. How do we make sure that we're using clean data sets, understand what the data sets are doing, understand what the guardrails are on the models are, right? A technical perspective in making sure that we're delivering responsible AI tools. The second piece is having more policy regulatory framework that can, when things do go wrong, how do we manage it in a way that promotes trust in the users and the public, right? So that's the second piece. But I think the third and the most important piece is building awareness. And that's where we need to work together, where the user community, the public is aware of what AI is, where it is useful, but also understand that it's not perfect. There are limitations, and they cannot take an output of ChatGPT and trust it blindly. Oftentimes people do that, and that can cause issues, simple things from missing a flight to something that could be more dangerous, right? So you have to build that awareness. We partnered, for example, with the Leonardo, which is a museum here, and created an immersive experience called Into the Mind of AI. And that's really good in educating the general public about AI. But then we complement that with discussion table sessions and roundtables where people come and say, is AI going to take over my job, right? Or is AI going to take over the world? And we can walk through them and talk to them that, look, it's not going to take a job, but you will be more competitive in a job if you understand and are able to leverage AI, right? So conversation like that. So I think the more we can move in these 3 dimensions, technology, regulatory and policy frameworks, and most importantly, building awareness into the community, the public about, the benefits and the concerns around this technology.
Manish, in terms of building the awareness, I think clearly and credibly explaining how these tools work and what they can be used for and what you need to be aware of, and in terms of how you might apply scrutiny or critical thinking to challenge the outputs and interact with them in a real way would be really helpful. And just having kind of a standardized methodology for doing that after understanding, hey, what are questions or techniques humans can use to validate or verify AI outputs and leverage them with high confidence to execute their jobs or improve the efficiency of how you pay your bills at home and things like that. So I think there's certainly a role for government to play, or policymakers, wherever they're coming from, to provide guidance on how individuals might apply that scrutiny to increase the trust and confidence in AI supported outputs. So I think it's a great point. To close, given your experience in computational science and as an educator and on AI governance initiatives, are there additional pieces of advice that you would give to policymakers, researchers, or developers working to advance AI in their fields of research?
I'm extremely optimistic about the potential of AI and how it can be a tremendous tool, technology that can help us address many of our challenges, tremendous opportunity it brings. I think understanding the scale of the impact to me is humbling when I try to address these things in my research groups and other places. And I think keeping in mind that this is a really powerful that can do a lot, but it can also have a negative impact if we don't keep that in mind, right? So I think being optimistic about the potential of AI and at the same time being aware that it's a big responsibility as we try to, advance this technology and incorporate it into almost every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. Well, Manish Parashar, thank you so much for joining us today, Director of Scientific and Computing Imaging Institute at the University of Utah. I guess, where can listeners go to check out more of your work and current priorities?
manishparashar.org or sci.utah.edu, sci.utah.edu.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate your perspective, and thanks again for lending your time here this afternoon, and we're excited to monitor your work moving forward.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.